This video is the UN Sustainability Development Goals, and I'm just going to point out quite a few things that are right in front of everybody's face. I'll just stop it there. I'll just go back a little bit. If you can see it. I'll have to play it again. There we go. Just note this. Salve Regina University. So it's obviously a place, a university. Okay.
Good evening, and thank you for the applause.
That's what I want it on. Right. This says man and woman are a debt slave to the Queen. That is exactly what this title says. This is a symbol for a woman, the V, downward V, or the letter V, and that's a symbol for a man. So you've got man and woman there, are a debt slave, DET, debt. You just got to move these around, it's not hard really. Debt slave, SLAVE, to the Queen. Regina means the Queen. So again, we've got man and woman are a debt slave to the Queen. But in this video, there's a lot more to it. You have to listen and interpret what he's saying.
Good evening, and thank you for the applause. As you just heard, I work for the United Nations, and part of my job is to give presentations to student groups. And now these students, they come from all over the world, from different continents, countries, cultures, and so on. And sometimes the questions they ask, they're related to the region they come from. So students from the Middle East sometimes ask about how to bring peace and stability to their societies. Or I have students from small islands who
Well, answer to that question is get rid of the church. The church controls all the what's going on, the religion, the wars, everything. So all this goes back to the church.
ask about climate change and the rising sea levels and how
Climate change. Again, the industrialists make up these laws and pass things like chemtrails, where they chemtrail the sky, causing climate change, charge everybody a tax. Who backs up the industrialists? The banks, which is also an industrialist. Who backs the banks up? The church. It's a big massive money making scam on every level. This is just another one. Sustainability. For who exactly? Like the rich?
how this will affect their homes and their islands. But what strikes me is that more often these students who come from all over the world have very similar questions and very similar concerns, actually. So they worry about, for example, the rising inequality in their societies. For example, that a handful of rich men control half of the planet's wealth, or terrorism, or other global trends like.
There you go. He just said it. Just said the exact words.
Men control half of the planet's wealth, or terrorism, or other global.
There you go, and that's exactly what they do. Control the planet's wealth, terrorism, and everything else. And this is it, there it is. You're a debt. You're in debt. Man and woman are in debt. A debt slave to the Queen, the industrialists, which again goes back to the church.
Trends like water scarcity, food insecurity, and so on.
And this is exactly
of course,
what
then
they're
they
causing.
ask, what is the UN doing to solve all of these problems? And I found that the expectations that students have of the UN, they vary quite a bit. So one extreme is that they have too high expectations and consequently feel disappointed. So they might ask, why has the UN not solved the Syria problem, the Syria crisis, in all these years? And I then often answer, well, I wish the UN had a magic wand with which it could easily solve all problems, but unfortunately it doesn't have such a magic wand. But it consists of
Get rid of the church.
Member states, and if these states strongly disagree on certain issues, then it's just very, very difficult to solve these issues. On the other extreme, there are students who, I think, underestimate what the UN can achieve. Maybe
They're not
because
achieving
the news
nothing.
here tends to focus on where the organization
Causing tyranny.
does not succeed. But if you look at the numbers, and I think its value is very evident. For example, it provides food to 80 million people in 80 countries. It vaccinates 45% of all children worldwide. It
vaccinates children.
provides assistance to over 65 million people who are fleeing wars, persecution, famine.
Who's
and
causing
so on.
all the wars?
So,
Famine.
and to get back to this question, what is the UN doing?
Nothing.
There's many things, of course. There's many agencies, there's many programs. What I talk about are the Sustainable Development Goals. And can I see a quick show of hands who has heard of the Sustainable Development Goals? Some of you, okay. Many of you will have a lot to learn today, so that's good. Here there are. They are 17. Now I'm not going to go.
There's 17 goals, but there's 169 targets, which he doesn't mention at all. He obviously must have forgot that part.
Through them individually, because there are quite a lot. But you can see the areas that they focus on here. Now these goals were agreed on in the year 2015 by all UN member states to be achieved by the year 2030. And I will say that they're part of a broader agenda, the so-called 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
Now 2030 is 666, creation. It's not the devil. The devil's made millions and millions and millions of money in the movies for the industrialists. Just like this, debt slave, they're fooling everybody right in front of your eyes. It's time to open them up, everyone. All you have to do is divide, take the 2 zeros off for 2030, so divide 2 into 3 and you get 666. Just for anybody who doesn't know.
And you know, it includes many targets on how we might achieve these goals. They include indicators on how we can track progress towards these goals. But the point that I just want to make now is they focus both on the consequences of these disturbing trends that I mentioned, like water scarcity, food insecurity, conflicts, but also on the root causes. So that.
And who's causing all of those? We get told it's the Muslims. There's no proof at all. There was no weapons of mass destruction. Did Tony Blair get put in jail for that? No. Malaysia took him to court, found him guilty of war crimes, took it to the Hague Commission, and that's where it still is. And he still walks around a free man, £50 million richer for selling Not just this country, out everybody else.
They both try to address the consequences, but also the root causes, and thus try to prevent crises. For example, they won't be able to solve all conflicts, but if we get these right, they can prevent conflicts in the future. One way to summarize this agenda is to say that these SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, are part of a plan of action to end poverty, protect the planet, promote prosperity, and ensure peace for all. Now, can I see a quick show of hands?
Are they causing any of that? Have they actually done anything towards that? The exact opposite is true. There's been nothing but wars galore for decades. How are they protecting the planet? Bombing it. They love to talk the talk and confuse everybody with stupid words like sustainability this, sustainability that. For who?
Who thinks this sounds very ambitious? That's what I thought. I also think it sounds very ambitious, but we actually have grounds for optimism.
It's just a
because we have these
salesman.
so-called Millennium Development Goals. And can I see another quick show of hands? Who has heard of these Millennium Development Goals? A couple of you? Okay, very good. Now, these were a set of 8 anti-poverty goals that ran from the year 2000 until the year 2015. And though we didn't achieve all of the goals, they were very successful. For example, the number of children who died before their 5th birthday in the year 1990 was 12
Why is he
million.
standing on a
That's per
red
year.
carpet?
In the year 2015, this number is 6 million. Of course, it's still much too high. It's clearly 6 million too many. But we saw that by really focusing our...
Let's listen to that again.
million too many, but we saw that by really focusing our attention for 6 million. Of course, it's still children died before their 5th birthday in the year 1990 was 12 million. That's per year. In the year 2015, this number is 6 million. Of course.
Right, he just gave you 12 million children are dying, or were dying, between 1990 and I didn't quite hear the rest of the year, but we've got 12 million, and then he says it's reduced to 6 million. Again, you've got 666. 12 plus 6 is 18. 3 sixes go into 18.
Of course, it's still much too high. It's clearly 6 million too many. In the year 1990 was 12 million. That's per year. In the year 2015, this number is 6 million. Of course, it's still much too high. It's clearly 6 million too many. But we saw that by really focusing our attention on certain problems, by rallying around countries, non-profit organizations, NGOs, business, and so on, we can really achieve a lot. So this model of setting goals in the area of development, that really worked well. So now we member states came up with these so-called Sustainable Development Goals. But these are not just another set of goals. These are something very different from anything we've had before in the field of development, and I'll explain why. One is they integrate the social, economic, and environmental dimensions of development. So when we devise policy, they guide countries to try and balance out these elements. Has anyone ever heard of the Rio Plus 20 conference? Some of you. This is a conference that took place in 2012. And at this conference, member states decided to create these goals. I like to show this slide because this logo nicely visualizes these 3 dimensions of sustainable development. You have the red person there, which stands for the social side. You have the blue steps, which stands for economic progress. And you have the green leaf, which stands for the environment. Mm-hmm. Some people say it looks like a shark eating a drowning person. But it's not a shark, it's sustainable development. Another thing is these goals are holistic, and that means, you know, the three main pillars of the UN's work are human rights, peace and security, and sustainable development. And this is the first time we have an agenda like this and goals that kind of wrap all of these elements into one. So that's also something which is relatively new. These goals were also negotiated through a very inclusive process. So all member states of the UN, they got together.
Yeah,
for,
did any
over
of
1
us
year,
get a say in it all?
discussed, negotiated what goals should be part of this agenda. And they also opened channels for many stakeholders. So for non-profit organizations, NGOs, other civil society groups, scientists, academia, and so on. And they all contribute to these discussions and to these negotiations. And we feel that they really, both the stakeholders and member states, have a very strong sense of ownership for these goals because they actually negotiated them. The whole process was also very transparent. So all of these discussions...
All does it do? This is like the Bilderberg meetings. They sit around a table discussing how much more tax they're going to take off of everybody, what tax they're going to put up, what more tax they're going to make up, more increase more stupid laws, and so on and so on.
Were live streamed on UN Web TV, and they're still available. They're on archive. Now, we will say not every one of these sessions was a cliffhanger, and you're probably not going to start binge watching hours and hours of recordings of intergovernmental negotiations, but the transparency was exemplary. Also, these goals are what we call universal, which means they are for all countries to achieve. So it's not a classical development agenda where you have certain goals and targets for developing countries to achieve, but these are goals for all countries to achieve. And the idea is that we will only be able to reach this objective
anything
of
they
achieving
say,
the goals and
you
reaching sustainable
reverse
development.
it. Take the
Every
opposite,
country
which
plays
means
parts and takes action. And,
the transparency
if
bit means you'll won't know
areas
what the
that
hell's
cover,
going on.
I don't think there's any
It won't
country
be that
can
clear.
say, we can lean back and there's nothing to do in any of these areas, because there's something to do in every country. Also, we have a strong review mechanism, which we didn't have for these previous goals. We have the so-called high-level political forum on sustainable development, which is a forum where once a year countries and stakeholders, again, NGOs, private sector, businesses, and so on, academia, come together in New York to discuss how is the progress going towards these goals. How are we doing? What are the big obstacles? How can we remove them?
What a
what are the
load of
rubbish. So
rubbish.
it's really a global peer learning exercise where countries discuss how we can do better in achieving these goals. And finally, I want to
failed
mention
on
the
every
overall
level,
vision
ain't
of
you?
this agenda, which is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is leave no one behind. So there's a very strong focus on really reaching those who are furthest behind first, and those who are most marginalized. So there's
Yeah, they're really doing a lot for the refugees, aren't they?
Now, finally,
Hey, complete
my key
joke.
messages in the end. One is the Sustainable Development Goals are a promise made to you. Now, people or in the public, when they hear about
promise,
UN global
have they
goals,
ever
they
kept
often
one of
think
them?
these
Eh?
in terms of an agreement between the UN and countries, but they should really be seen as a commitment by your leaders to you. So they're really
Leaders,
a
they're a
promise
bunch of
decision makers
arseholes.
to the public, to the people who will stand to benefit if these goals are realized. So that's the kind of relations that you should look at these goals. And also, this follows the second point follows from that, which is hold your leaders responsible and hold them to this promise of the goals.
Is he for friggin' real?
It's member states, it's governments who lead
Again,
on this agenda.
Tony
they
Blair,
drive
is he in
forward.
prison?
But I think
No.
we'll not be able
So
to
stop
achieve it if it's
talking
only a
utter
top-down
rubbish.
process. So we really have to make it a bottom-up process as well. In other words, have the public, have individuals, have stakeholders who have a stake in these goals. Also promote the
Keeps
goals and get
mentioning the
engaged
shareholders.
and hold their leaders to this process.
Money, money,
that's
money. That's
my
all
call for
they're
action.
interested in.
Please get engaged, become informed, because that's also the
Why do you
basis
think
of,
the world's in such a
promoting
mess?
the goals. Spread the
So
word
they
and hold your leaders
destroy
to
it,
this
then
promise.
don't
And I mentioned
do
earlier
as the
UN
promise
does not
and
have a magic
rebuild it.
wand. I think we're working
Just
on
put
one.
pipelines in
But
to drain the
until
oil.
we have it, I think you'd be surprised how much
Fill
we
the
can
soldiers
achieve if everybody,
full of,
rallies around certain goals.
in the poppy
and
fields,
finally, I hope that I'll be
mining all
invited
that.
back here in 2030 to talk to you about
Ridiculous.
how we achieved all of these goals. Thank you.
have it again. Man and woman, debt slave to the Queen. And that's exactly what it says. Man and woman, debt slave to the Queen. That's exactly what this means.